I still remember the way the lights flickered that night, soft, golden, trembling like they were afraid to stay on too long. The smell of roasted turkey mixed with cinnamon candles, and for a moment, I thought maybe this Christmas would feel different. Maybe the silence that lived inside this old house would finally loosen its grip on me. But silence has a way of hiding behind laughter. It waits, patient, until the music fades and everyone goes home. That's when it whispers the truth. I sat in the corner of the living room, next to the fire that crackled like an old friend trying to keep me company. Clara's voice echoed from the kitchen, warm, confident, a sound that used to belong to a little girl who once believed her father could fix anything. Now she belonged to another world. Her husband, Daniel, was setting the table, and his father, Jorge, arrived in that polished car of his, the kind that makes people stare for all the wrong reasons. I smiled, pretending I didn't notice how Jorge's presence filled the room like perfume that never fades. He hugged Clara, brought her flowers, and made her laugh in a way I hadn't heard in years. I guess that's when I realized how far she'd drifted from me. When the time for presents came, Clara's eyes shone as she handed me a small box wrapped in red paper. My hands trembled a little when I untied the ribbon. Inside was a pair of brown slippers, soft, ordinary, exactly like the ones I already had. I thanked her, because that's what fathers do. We pretend not to notice the weight of things. Then she turned to Jorge, smiling wide, and gave him an envelope. "It's a surprise," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. He opened it, and I saw a travel voucher, first class, a week in Italy. Everyone cheered, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard. But no. The truth sat there between us like a shadow nobody wanted to name. I felt something break inside me, not out of anger, but out of the quiet ache of being forgotten. That was the moment I knew. That night, I wouldn't stay silent anymore. Because some gifts are too heavy to carry alone. And before the lights went out, I decided I would give my daughter the only present I had left, the truth. So stay with me tonight. Let me tell you what happened next. And tell me, where are you listening to this story from? Because maybe, just maybe, you felt it too, that empty chair at the Christmas table, the one that still waits for forgiveness. I had spent weeks carving that small wooden box. My hands trembled more than they used to, and the wood wasn't perfect, but it carried something my heart still knew how to give: love. I thought maybe they would understand that, maybe Amanda would smile and see what I meant. I wanted to bring a piece of the past, a reminder that Christmas wasn't about the gifts, but the hands that gave them. But when the paper came off and the laughter came on, I knew I had misjudged the moment. They laughed softly at first, then louder, the kind of laughter that leaves no room for words. Robert made a joke about antiques and old habits, and Jamal just smiled, trying to hide the shame that burned in his eyes. Amanda didn't laugh. She just stared at me, her small fingers tracing the carved letters on the box. Light never forgets where it came from. That was all I said. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to explain that inside the box there was something more, something I hoped would mean something one day. Instead, I just nodded and thanked them for letting me come. I sat back, letting the voices blend with the crackling fire, the lights, the clinking of glasses. For a moment, I thought I heard Anna's voice whispering near the firewood, telling me to stay kind, to forgive. And I did. Because sometimes the things that look small in the eyes of others are the very things that carry the weight of miracles. That night, they laughed at the old man and his foolish wooden box. But hours later, when the lights went out and the world turned cold, that little box would become the only source of warmth and life left. Funny how Christmas works like that, how it turns laughter into tears, pride into prayer, and a simple gift into salvation. Where are you listening to this story from tonight? Tell me in the comments below, maybe your Christmas once felt like mine. The sound of laughter filled the house, but it wasn't mine. It belonged to everyone else, to Clara, to Daniel, to Jorge. It floated above the clinking of glasses, the cheerful Christmas music playing softly from an old speaker, and the rustling of gift paper scattered across the floor. I just sat there, the slippers still in my hands, pretending to admire them as if they were something precious. They were warm, brown, soft on the inside. The kind you'd buy on sale when you had nothing better to give. I looked around the room. The Christmas tree sparkled in the corner, full of silver ornaments that Clara had chosen herself. Not a single one of the old decorations I kept in boxes for years, the ones her mother, Elisa, used to love, had made it to the branches. I guess they didn't match the new house, or maybe they didn't match the new life. I smiled when Daniel offered me a drink. Whiskey, his favorite. I said no, like always. My hands were shaking too much anyway. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, but for some reason, I couldn't taste a thing. Clara kept talking, moving from one story to another, her eyes shining under the Christmas lights. She looked beautiful, so much like her mother that it hurt to look at her for too long. I wanted to tell her that, but something in her tone stopped me. It wasn't the voice of a daughter talking to her father anymore. It was the voice of someone who had moved on, someone who had outgrown the need for a man like me. When Jorge opened the envelope and found the travel voucher, the room exploded in laughter and applause. He hugged Clara like she was his own daughter, kissed her forehead, and said, "You shouldn't have, sweetheart." His voice dripped with charm, that kind of easy confidence I never had. I just sat there, nodding alone, pretending to share the joy. Inside, I felt the old ache returning, the one that never really left since Elisa died. I used to believe I had done a good job raising Clara. I worked long hours in the workshop, built furniture until my hands bled, just so she'd never feel the emptiness I felt growing up. But looking at her that night, I wondered if I had built walls instead of bridges. After dinner, they all moved to the living room. Jorge told one of his stories about business and travel, the kind that sounds like a speech rehearsed too many times. Daniel laughed at every line. Clara listened, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes glowing with admiration. I watched her and thought of the nights we used to spend building that same Christmas tree together, when she was little. She'd hang each ornament carefully, always asking, "Daddy, do you think Mom would like it this way?" And I'd answer, "She'd love it, sweetheart." Back then, I thought love was enough. It's strange how time turns memories into ghosts. You think you're holding on to people, but really, it's only the echo of their voices you're keeping alive. When everyone had finished eating, I went outside for some air. The night was cold, the kind of cold that bites through old bones. The stars looked sharper than usual, and I could see my breath rising like smoke. I stood there, slippers still in my hand, and I laughed quietly to myself. It wasn't the gift that hurt. It was the message behind it, the unspoken truth that I had become the old man no one really sees anymore. Through the window, I could see Clara showing Jorge photos on her phone. He leaned closer, smiling, nodding with that same look of approval she always seemed to need. For a second, I hated him, not for what he had, but for what I didn't. For the place he had taken in her heart. I turned away, my throat tight. I thought of Elisa again, how she used to touch my shoulder whenever I started to drift too far into myself. She had a way of grounding me, pulling me back to love even when life felt too heavy. I whispered her name into the wind. "You'd know what to say, Elisa. You always did." The wind answered with silence. When I went back inside, Clara was already clearing the table. Jorge was pouring another drink. I sat quietly, pretending not to notice that nobody asked if I wanted anything. The fire had gone down to embers, small orange lights barely holding on. That was when Clara walked over and placed her hand on my shoulder. "Dad, did you like the slippers?" she asked, smiling that polite, distant smile. I nodded. "They're perfect," I said. She smiled again, but I could tell she didn't hear the sadness behind my words. Later that night, after they'd all gone home, I sat by the fire again. The house was silent, the kind of silence that hums inside your ears. I held the slippers on my lap, feeling the softness of the fabric against my fingertips. And then I saw it, the photo on the mantel. Elisa holding Clara as a baby, both of them smiling at me. I remembered that Christmas, the last one before the sickness came. I remembered what Elisa said as we watched Clara open her presents. "Promise me one thing, Jonathan. No matter what happens, never let her forget who she is." That promise had haunted me for years. Because somewhere along the way, I had failed it. And as I looked at those slippers, I realized something: gifts aren't just things. Their words were too afraid to say. That night, I decided I would speak mine. No matter how much it hurt. Because the truth, once wrapped and hidden long enough, becomes its own kind of gift. And this Christmas, I was done pretending. That night I didn't sleep. The fire had died, but the glow stayed on the walls like old memories that refused to leave. I sat there in the same chair, the slippers on the floor, my thoughts circling around like restless birds that couldn't find a place to land. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, thick, almost alive. I kept thinking about what Clara had said, the tone of her voice, the distance behind her smile. I wondered when that wall had started to grow between us. Maybe it was the day Elisa left. Maybe it was before that, in the moments I thought I was protecting her by keeping things unsaid. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Christmas morning had come, but it didn't feel like Christmas. I looked at the tree again, all new and shining, and I realized it looked nothing like the one Elisa and I used to make. Hers was smaller, humbler, full of handmade ornaments, little angels made of paper, stars painted with Clara's tiny fingers. We used to laugh when the glue got stuck to her hair. Elisa would say, "That's how memories are made, darling, messy but worth keeping." I closed my eyes and, for a moment, I was back there. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Elisa was humming softly as snow fell outside. Clara, only 8, ran around the living room with tinsel tangled in her hair, her cheeks pink from laughter. She jumped into my lap and whispered, "Daddy, do you think Santa will bring Mom the music box she wants?" I remember looking at Elisa, pretending not to know she'd already bought it for herself weeks earlier. I said, "If she's been good this year." Clara giggled and said, "Mom's always good." The memory faded like breath on glass. When I opened my eyes, the house looked smaller. Time had taken pieces of it, the warmth, the voices, the life. Everything felt like a photograph left too long in the sun. I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea. The kettle hissed like it was angry at me for staying up. I looked at the table, at the 3 empty glasses still sitting there. Jorge's laughter still echoed faintly in my head, like a song that wouldn't stop playing. I remembered the first time I met him years ago, before Clara got married. He was already confident then, polished, successful. The kind of man who walks into a room and makes everyone feel smaller without even trying. Elisa used to say he had a powerful presence. I used to call it arrogance. But there was more to him than that. Something darker. Something that connected us in ways no one else knew. I went to the window and looked outside. The street was quiet, covered with a thin layer of frost. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, tired eyes, gray hair, lines that told stories no one wanted to hear. I thought of the day Elisa got sick. The day everything started to fall apart. She was sitting by the window, sunlight spilling across her face, when she said, "Promise me, Jonathan, you'll keep her away from him." I didn't understand at first. "Who?" I asked. "Jorge," she whispered. "Please. Promise me." I did. Without asking why. Without knowing what she meant. I thought it was the illness talking. I thought grief was making her see ghosts that weren't there. But now, years later, watching Clara laugh beside him, I understood the fear in her eyes. The truth had been waiting all this time, like an unopened letter. I walked down the hallway to the small room that used to be Elisa's. I hadn't stepped inside in months. Dust lay thick on the furniture, but her scent was still there, faint, floral, like lilacs after the rain. I ran my hand over the dresser, my fingers brushing against the edges of old photographs. One of them showed us standing outside the workshop, both smiling, both so sure of tomorrow. That was the day Jorge offered me the loan to expand the business. I was desperate back then. Work was slow, bills were piling up. He came to me like a friend, said he believed in me, said he wanted to help. I took the money. I trusted him. And a month later, when Elisa found out he'd used that same business deal to betray her father's company, I lost everything, the trust, the peace, the man I thought I was. We never told Clara. She was too young. Elisa said she didn't want her daughter growing up with bitterness in her heart. Let her love him, she said. She'll see the truth one day. That day never came. Until maybe now. I sat on the edge of Elisa's old bed and felt the wood creak beneath my weight. My hands trembled as I opened the nightstand drawer, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside, under a stack of folded scarves, I found it, the envelope. Yellowed, sealed, untouched. Her handwriting on the front, soft and familiar, for Clara. When the time is right. I stared at it for a long time, my chest heavy. The truth was inside, waiting to be freed. But I was afraid. Afraid of what it might destroy, afraid of what it might heal. I pressed the letter against my chest, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Is the time right now, Elisa?" The wind outside howled against the window, almost like an answer. I didn't open it. Not yet. But in that moment, I knew one thing: the past doesn't stay buried forever. It echoes in every silence, in every word left unsaid, in every gift that carries the weight of what was lost. And as I sat there in that quiet room, the first light of Christmas morning began to touch the curtains. It felt like the beginning of something, or maybe the end. Morning arrived without warning. No birdsong, no sudden warmth. Just light, pale and cold, slipping through the curtains like it didn't belong there. I was still sitting on the edge of that old bed, Elisa's letter in my hands, untouched. The air in the room was still, as if it too was holding its breath. I rose slowly, joints stiff from the long night, and walked down the hall. My footsteps sounded louder than usual, each one echoing against the wooden floor like a question I couldn't answer. The slippers sat exactly where I'd left them by the fireplace, untouched, a symbol now, not of comfort, but of what had been lost between us. The house, in its quiet way, spoke to me. Every room had its own memory. The kitchen still held the scent of cinnamon from the night before, but it was faint now, overtaken by the smell of cold and emptiness. The chairs were pushed in. The wine glasses half-rinsed. Clara had cleaned up before leaving, like a polite guest in a stranger's home. I moved to the living room and sat in the same chair I'd occupied the night before. The fire was gone. Just ashes now. And I felt something settle inside me, not peace, not quite sadness. Something heavier. Something like surrender. I stared at the tree, at its perfect ornaments, its manufactured glow. No memories in those decorations. Just silence. I used to believe the house only felt this empty after everyone left. But now I understood it had been empty long before. There was a time when laughter filled this place. When Clara would dance around the living room with a scarf pretending to be a princess, when Elisa would read her bedtime stories under a blanket fort we built together. And I, tired from the workshop, would sit on the floor and watch them, wondering how I'd been lucky enough to land in a life that felt borrowed from a dream. But dreams fade. And in their place, we build routines. Walls. Quiet spaces. I walked over to the old bookshelf and pulled out one of Clara's storybooks. The Snow Bear. The corners were torn, the pages bent. Her name was scribbled on the inside cover in crooked letters. I ran my fingers over them and closed my eyes. I could still hear her little voice saying, "Read it again, Daddy. Just one more time." I should have said yes more often. I should have read that book until the spine broke. I should have told her the truth before the silence grew too wide between us. But I didn't. I kept my head down. I worked. I provided. I thought that was love. But love isn't just roofs and meals. Love is stories at bedtime. It's old ornaments on a tree. It's showing up even when you're broken. I sat back down and stared into the cold hearth. The silence of the house didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like judgment. That's when I realized something. It wasn't Clara who had drifted away from me. It was me. All these years, I thought I was the one being left behind. But maybe I was the one who stepped back first, after Elisa died, too scared to let Clara see how shattered I really was. Maybe she mistook my silence for distance. And maybe she found in Jorge the kind of presence I refused to be after everything fell apart. The thought made me sick. Not with anger, with regret. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and buried my face in my hands. The quiet wrapped around me like a thick coat. And in that moment, I wished I could go back, not to fix everything, but just to hold her hand again. Just to look into Clara's eyes and let her see how much I loved her. But you don't get second chances with time. You only get the truth. And if you're lucky, forgiveness. I opened my eyes and looked straight ahead. The photo of Elisa and Clara still sat on the mantel, the one from that Christmas long ago. They were both smiling. I wasn't in the frame. I'd been the one taking the picture. Always on the outside, even then. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter again. I held it with both hands, feeling its weight. It was just paper, ink, a few words from a woman long gone. But to me, it was a door, and behind it, a truth I had buried too long. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just held it, like it might warm my hands, like it might hold Elisa's scent one more time. I thought about Clara's eyes when she gave me those slippers. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She thought she was doing enough. And maybe, to her, she was. But that's the thing about wounds between people who love each other, they're often invisible until something touches them. The slippers touched mine. And now here I am. If you're listening to this, I wonder where you are. What room you're in. What silence you carry. Maybe you've sat in a house like mine. Maybe you've felt the same quiet judgment in the air, heard the same echoes of words you should have said, but didn't. Tell me, if you're still with me, where are you listening from? Because I believe some of us are bound together not by blood or history, but by what we've lost, and by what we're still hoping to find again. Maybe, like me, you're sitting in a quiet house. And maybe this story isn't just mine anymore. I didn't open the letter that day. Not yet. But I kept it with me, tucked into the pocket of my old wool cardigan like something sacred, something fragile. It felt like carrying Elisa's hand over my heart. That night, after the silence of Christmas morning, I stayed inside. I didn't call Clara. I didn't check my phone. I didn't clean up the dishes from the night before. I just sat with the weight of what I had been avoiding for years. But grief is patient. It waits. And when it knows you've run out of ways to avoid it, it speaks. By evening, the house had grown darker again, shadows stretching long across the wooden floor. I lit a single candle, not for light, but because it reminded me of Elisa. She used to light them every Christmas Eve. Said it made the house feel warmer, even when it was cold. I walked back to her old room, drawn there like the tide to the shore. The air still carried something of her, even after all this time. Maybe it was in the fabric of the curtains, or maybe it was just in me. The letter was folded tight now, creased at the corners from my hands, but unopened still. I placed it on the nightstand. Just looking at it made my chest hurt. I sat on her bed again, the same spot as the day before. For a long time, I didn't move. I stared at the drawer, the one where I had found the letter. Something else called to me now. A drawer I hadn't touched since the funeral. When I opened it, it creaked like it was waking from sleep. Inside were Elisa's old journals, leather-bound, edges curled. I pulled one out and opened it at random. Her handwriting was gentle, careful, the kind that looked like it was meant to be read in a whisper. Jonathan's getting quieter these days. I know the weight he carries. I see it in his hands. I wish he'd talk to me. But he's trying to protect me, I can feel it. Even now, even in my worst moments, he still wants to shield me from pain. I closed the book. My eyes burned. I hadn't cried in years. Maybe because I thought if I started, I wouldn't stop. I reached for the letter again. The seal tore softly. My hands shook. The paper inside was aged but smooth, as if her voice had preserved it. I unfolded it slowly, like unwrapping a memory. At the top, in that same delicate handwriting, she had written, "For our daughter, when the silence becomes too loud." I read the letter in one breath. And then everything inside me broke. It wasn't just a goodbye. It wasn't a note to ease her passing. It was a confession and a warning. Elisa had written about Jorge. About the way he had manipulated her father's business, about how he had turned on the people who once trusted him. She wrote about how she saw something in him, a hunger, a selfishness that terrified her. She asked me to keep Clara close, to protect her from what Jorge could become in her life. And then, at the end, she wrote something that shattered me. If she ever forgets who she is, remind her. Remind her that love isn't measured by gifts or titles, but by presence. Remind her of the father who showed up, every day, even with nothing in his hands. That was the greatest gift I ever gave her, you. I don't remember how long I sat there after that. Hours, maybe. Time melted. I was back in every moment I had missed, birthdays I attended but didn't speak during, dinners where I nodded but never shared how lonely I was. I thought I was sparing her pain by never telling her the truth. But maybe all I'd done was teach her to look for love in the wrong places. The next day, I called her. Her voice was tired. I told her I needed to see her. No reason, no urgency. just that I had something to give her. She agreed. That afternoon, she came alone. No Daniel. No Jorge. She stood in the doorway, hesitant. I offered her a seat by the fireplace, but she didn't take off her coat. Just looked around, as if seeing the house again for the first time. I found something, I said, my voice barely audible. She didn't respond. I walked to the shelf and took the letter. I placed it in her hands. It's from your mother, I said. She stared at it, frozen. She wrote it before she passed. I should have given it to you sooner. But I wasn't ready. She looked up at me then, her eyes clouded, uncertain. I didn't want to change how you saw him, I added. I thought I was protecting you. But maybe I was protecting myself. She didn't open the letter, not right away. Just held it in her lap. We sat in silence, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like shared air, like something fragile between us that neither of us wanted to break. I didn't mean to make you feel forgotten, she said finally. Her voice was soft. I don't know how to carry it all. Losing her. Watching you disappear into the quiet. I nodded, unable to speak. She looked down at the slippers by the hearth. And for the first time, I saw the regret in her eyes. I thought they'd be useful, she said. I smiled, just a little. They are, I said. They brought me here. To this moment. And that was the truth. Because sometimes, the smallest gift is the one that leads you back to everything you've lost. She came back the next day, didn't say much, just stepped into the kitchen like she had done 1,000 times as a little girl, but now carried a weight that bent her shoulders and dulled her voice. I was slicing bread not because I was hungry but because my hands needed something to do while my heart sat still. She placed the envelope on the table without a word, her eyes red and swollen, not from anger but from something deeper, something like betrayal with no name. I poured her coffee, she didn't touch it. She sat, looking out the window like she was trying to remember who she was before yesterday. I told her everything then, not with speeches, not with explanations, just one truth spilling after another, like a wound that had waited too long to bleed. I told her about the debt, the handshake that ruined more than business, the man Jorge was before he became her second father. I told her how I stayed quiet to protect her from growing up bitter, from choosing sides too early, from living with the same disappointment I carried every day since her mother died. I thought I was doing the right thing, I truly did. But now, sitting across from my daughter as she tried to piece together what love meant, I realized silence can be just as cruel as lies. She didn't cry. That was the part that broke me. She just listened, her face still, her hands folded like she was in church. When I finished, she stood, said she needed time, and left the same way she arrived, without slamming a door, without a single accusation, just with that heavy quiet that follows someone who just lost the shape of something they believed in. That night, she invited me to dinner. At her house. Jorge would be there, Daniel too. I didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe it was her way of pretending things could still be normal. Or maybe she was trying to see the truth for herself, in his eyes, in his voice. I arrived early. I brought a bottle of the wine Elisa used to like, though I doubted anyone would notice. The house was clean, perfectly arranged, candles lit, everything prepared with the same precision Clara had learned from watching her mother all those years ago. Jorge arrived last, with a laugh too loud and a hug too long. He kissed her on the cheek, handed her a gift wrapped in gold paper, and settled into his seat like a king returning to his throne. Dinner started quiet. Small talk. Work. Weather. Clara served food, nodded, smiled, but something in her eyes had changed. She didn't look at Jorge the way she used to. She didn't laugh at his stories. She didn't ask about his next trip or the clients he always named like trophies. Daniel kept trying to fill the silence, but no one was really listening. Then, somewhere between the second glass of wine and dessert, she put down her fork, folded her napkin slowly, and turned to him. It didn't come with drama. No raised voice. No accusation. Just a question. A simple one. Something about the past, about a business deal, about a man named Silva, Elisa's father. Jorge's smile faltered for the first time. He hesitated, blinked, glanced at me, and I knew in that second that the foundation beneath him had cracked. Clara pressed further, calm, precise, not with the fury of someone seeking revenge, but with the steady rhythm of someone asking for the truth that had been stolen from her. Jorge tried to deflect, to charm, to laugh it off, but it didn't work. His voice lost its shine. The words became excuses, half-truths, things that rang false in a room where the past was finally louder than the present. Daniel looked between them, unsure what he was watching. I stayed quiet. This was not my battle anymore. This was the moment Elisa had written that letter for. Clara wasn't a little girl anymore. She was standing at the edge of a cliff built from memory, and now she was deciding whether to jump or turn away. Jorge said something about perception, about how people remember what suits them. But it didn't matter. The truth had already entered the room, sat down at the table, and stared him in the face. Clara excused herself. Jorge tried to call after her, but his voice had lost its weight. He looked at me, and for the first time in all these years, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but of losing the power he didn't even realize he'd been given. I stood. I didn't say anything. I walked out of that house into the cold night air, my breath visible in the light of the porch. I didn't look back. Some doors don't need to be closed because they were never really open. As I walked home, the wind sharp against my face, I thought about how long we carry silence like it's armor when really it's a cage. I thought about Elisa, about the way she used to say the truth will always find its way home. And I thought about Clara, my daughter, my little girl, who had finally seen what I had carried alone for too long. That dinner didn't end with dessert. It ended with truth. And sometimes, that's the only course that matters. I didn't sleep that night either. I walked the house like it was a museum of moments, touching frames, brushing dust off shelves, hearing voices that no longer lived here. Clara didn't call, and I didn't expect her to. Some truths take time to settle, like snow after a storm. They don't land gently. They fall all at once, and the silence afterward feels heavier than before. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker, the same ones Elisa used to say looked like candles floating in the dark. I missed her voice more than I could admit, even to myself. The next day passed like fog. I didn't do much. I didn't need to. The air in the house had changed. Not physically, but in weight. Everything felt full, dense, like the silence was no longer empty but occupied by something that had been waiting to speak for years. By afternoon, I heard the knock. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hesitant. Just 3 firm taps on the door, like a memory announcing itself. I opened it, and there she was. Clara, alone, holding the letter in her hand. She didn't step inside right away. She looked at me like she was still deciding what kind of man she was looking at. I stepped aside without a word, and she entered. We sat in the living room. The fire was lit this time. I had done that for her, not for the warmth, but because I remembered how she used to stare into the flames when she was sad, as if they held answers she couldn't find in words. She handed me the letter again, and I placed it on the table between us like a fragile truth that neither of us was ready to hold anymore. She asked me why I never told her. I didn't have a rehearsed answer. I told her what was real. That I was afraid. That after Elisa died, I felt like the only thing I had left was Clara's peace, her innocence, her image of the world as a place that still made sense. I thought protecting that meant protecting her from pain. But I was wrong. You can't protect someone by keeping them blind. You only delay the moment they crash. I told her about Elisa's last days. How she grew quiet, not out of fear, but out of sadness. How she watched Clara from her bed and whispered things I never wrote down because I was too afraid they'd haunt me. How she made me promise to never let Jorge replace what she had tried so hard to build between us. I told her about the betrayal, not just the one in business, but the deeper one in the way Jorge stood by as everything we had worked for crumbled, how he smiled through it like it wasn't his fault, how he visited Elisa once, with flowers and empty apologies, and never came back when the truth became too ugly to face. Clara listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She just sat there, unraveling years of false safety in silence. I watched her and saw my daughter, not the adult version with her neat clothes and controlled voice, but the little girl who used to tug on my sleeve when she was scared. And now, she was scared again. Not of monsters under the bed, but of realizing the man she had admired had cracks deeper than she could accept. I told her about the day Jorge offered me the loan. How it seemed like help, how it felt like salvation. And how, weeks later, I learned it came with strings that pulled everything apart. He had taken control of what we built. He had flipped contracts, used insider knowledge, and turned my father-in-law's business into a shell. Elisa found out. She confronted him. And he denied it, smoothly, the way only a man who's used to lying can. She wanted to press charges. But then the diagnosis came. Cancer. Fast. Aggressive. And her fight turned inward. We let it go. For her peace. For Clara. And that decision haunted every breath I took since. I told her I watched Jorge become the man she trusted, the man she ran to when she needed support. And every time I saw her look at him with the admiration she used to reserve for me, I swallowed the truth like poison. I thought I could live with it. I thought time would wash it away. But it didn't. It just built a dam behind my ribs until one day it broke, all at once, because of a pair of slippers and a travel voucher. She asked what I wanted now. I told her I didn't want anything. Not revenge, not distance. I just didn't want to leave this world with lies still echoing in the hallways. I wanted her to know who she was, who her mother really was, and what I had tried, in my broken way, to protect. She leaned back in her chair. Closed her eyes. For a moment, I thought she'd leave. But then she reached for the letter again, held it against her chest, and whispered thank you. Not loud. Not forced. Just quiet and full of something I hadn't felt in this house for a long time. Recognition. She stood, walked to the mantel, picked up a photo of Elisa, and looked at it for a long time. Then she placed it back down, turned to me, and said she needed to be alone. I nodded. She left. And when the door closed behind her, I didn't feel empty. I felt something new. Not peace. Not closure. But truth. And for the first time in years, it was enough. The days that followed were quiet, not like the silence from before, not the heavy kind that presses on your chest and makes every hour feel like a stone in your pocket. This silence was different. It felt open, uncertain, like standing in a room after someone has just left and you're not sure if they're coming back. I moved slower through the house, not because I was tired, but because everything felt more fragile now, like the air itself had changed. I left Elisa's letter on the table where Clara had placed it last, untouched since the day she held it against her heart. I kept walking past it like it was a living thing, like it might speak again if I listened closely enough. I didn't hear from her for 2 days. I didn't expect to. She had just watched the foundation of her beliefs crumble, and that kind of grief doesn't move in straight lines. It twists. It rests. It comes back in waves. I spent most of the time in the workshop, sanding an old chair that didn't need sanding, oiling wood that was already smooth, pretending that my hands could still fix something. But no one ever carried the weight of a broken heart. I knew that now. It was the 3rd morning when she came. No call. No warning. Just the sound of her car pulling into the driveway like it used to when she was young and wanted to tell me about her day. I stayed where I was, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee I'd already let go cold. She stepped out, slower than usual, but lighter somehow. Not because she was happy, but because the burden had shifted. She was carrying it differently now. Not as a weight to hide, but as something she had decided to face. She sat beside me. We didn't say hello. We didn't need to. The porch creaked beneath us like it always had, the sound oddly comforting, like the house remembered how to welcome her. She looked out at the trees, still bare from winter, branches thin and trembling in the wind. I waited. She started talking, voice low and steady. She told me she had spoken to Jorge. She said he didn't deny it. Not all of it, at least. He admitted to things in a quiet, distant way, like they were stories from another life. He said it wasn't personal. That it was just business. She said that was the moment she realized how little he understood what he had taken. Not just money. Not just power. But trust. And the fragile piece of family needs to hold itself together. She told me she cried, not because he had failed her, but because she had let herself believe something that was never real. She said she felt stupid. I told her she wasn't. I told her even I had believed in him once. That's what made the betrayal cut so deep. We sat in silence after that. But again, it wasn't the old kind. It was a silence that allowed things to settle, to breathe. She turned to me, her eyes soft and tired, and asked if I forgave her. That question nearly broke me. Because all I ever wanted was for her to be okay, for her to live a life where she didn't carry the kind of weight I carried. I never blamed her for loving him. I never blamed her for growing close to someone who was there when I was only a shadow in the corner. I blamed myself, always, for stepping back, for not being louder, braver, more honest. So I told her there was nothing to forgive. But she said there was. Not because she meant to hurt me, but because she did. That sometimes we hurt the ones we love not with cruelty, but with absence, with the parts of ourselves we choose not to see. She said the slippers were a mistake, not because of what they were, but because of what they said. And that she understood now what it meant to be loved in quiet ways. In the dinners I cooked when I didn't eat. In the nights I stayed up fixing broken furniture so she could sleep in a room that didn't creak. In the fact that even when I was grieving, I still folded her school clothes with hands that shook. She saw it all now. She reached for my hand then. For the first time in years, her fingers wrapped around mine the way they used to when she was afraid of the dark. I felt her squeeze gently, and I didn't say anything. I just let my hand stay there, warm and still, as if I had been waiting my whole life for that one moment. We sat like that until the wind picked up and the cold reminded us that time was still moving. She stood, kissed the top of my head, and told me she'd be back tomorrow. I watched her walk to the car and drive away, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel left behind. I felt chosen. Forgiveness doesn't come like a flood. It comes in drops. In small gestures. In a quiet seat on a porch. In a hand held after too long apart. That morning, I realized I had spent so much of my life trying to give her everything, without ever realizing that what she needed most was something I had always had. My presence. And that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. The morning she came back, it was snowing. Not the heavy kind that stops the world, but soft flakes falling slow like they didn't want to wake anyone. The sky was pale and silent, the kind of silence that feels like something is about to end or begin. I had been up since before the sun, not because I couldn't sleep, but because something inside me told me this day would matter. I boiled water for tea, set out 2 cups, one for her and one for me, and then I sat by the window with the fire low and steady behind me, watching the world turn white. She arrived just after 9, coat buttoned to her neck, scarf tucked close, eyes softer than they'd been in years. She smiled when she saw me, not the polite smile people give when they don't know what else to do, but the kind that carries memory, the kind that says we've walked through something and made it to the other side. She took off her coat, sat in the chair across from mine, and for a long while, we didn't say anything. We just listened to the fire crackle and the kettle whistle, like the house itself was speaking. I gave her the cup of tea. She held it in both hands like it was more than warmth, like it was comfort she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. I told her I had something for her. She looked confused, maybe thinking it was another letter or another forgotten truth, but I shook my head. I reached beneath the chair and handed her a small box. No ribbon, no paper, just a simple wooden box I had made myself, sanded smooth and stained dark like the old table she used to draw on when she was little. She opened it slowly. Inside, there was a key. Just one. I told her it was to the workshop. The place where I had spent years hiding from grief, from guilt, from her. I told her everything inside was hers now. The tools, the notebooks, the sketches, the half-finished pieces of furniture with her initials carved into the wood. I told her I wanted her to have it, not because she needed it, but because I wanted her to know that every moment I spent in there, I was thinking of her. That place was never an escape. It was how I kept loving her when I didn't know how to say it out loud. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just closed the box, held it to her chest, and nodded like she understood something deeper than words could hold. After that, we spent most of the morning just sitting. She asked about old things. The music box. The Christmas when the tree fell over. The story Elisa used to tell about the time Clara tried to make cookies using salt instead of sugar. We laughed. Not loud, but honest. I showed her the old photo albums. She stayed for lunch. We ate soup and bread and talked about nothing and everything. It felt like breathing after holding it in for too long. When she left that afternoon, I walked her to the car. She hugged me before getting in. Not the kind of hug you give out of duty. The kind that means something. The kind that says I see you now, I hear you, I forgive you. After she left, I went back inside. I stood in the middle of the living room, looked around at everything, and felt something shift. The air was lighter. The weight was gone. Not forgotten, not erased, just lighter. I went to Elisa's room one last time. Sat on the bed. Closed my eyes. I thanked her. For the letter. For the love. For the strength I didn't have but found anyway. That night, I wrote a letter. Not because I had more secrets, but because I knew I wouldn't always be here. And I wanted Clara to have something to hold on to when the house was quiet again. I told her I loved her. That I always had. That every sacrifice, every quiet moment, every unspoken word had come from the same place, love. I told her that the final gift a father can give is not protection, not even wisdom, but truth. The kind that allows those we love to see us fully and still choose to stay. I folded the letter, placed it inside the same wooden box, and locked the workshop door one last time. It's been weeks now. Snow still covers the ground. The fire still burns. The house no longer feels empty. Clara comes more often. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Daniel. She brings candles. She brings laughter. She brings silence, too, but now it's the kind that heals. And every time I look at those slippers by the fire, I smile. Not because they're special, not because they were expensive, but because they were the beginning of the end of a silence that lasted too long. Because sometimes the smallest gifts carry the loudest truths. This was my Christmas story. One of loss. Of silence. Of truth. But mostly, of love. The quiet kind. The kind that survives. If you've listened all the way to the end, maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you felt it too, the distance, the ache, the longing to be seen. So I'll ask you now, the same way I asked her. Are you ready to give the gift that truly matters? Not things. Not noise. But presence. Forgiveness. And truth. That's what Christmas gave me. That's what I leave with you.